this evening is forest poet Roger Huddle. So if everybody could go on to mute. Roger was in a former life a graphic designer. He's also an artist and a political activist. For example, he was the co-founder of Rock Against Racism in 1976. He's been with Forest Poets since we began in 2009, and he's recently been published in Brittlestar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our first poet, Roger Huddle.
Okay, thanks very much. 5 days' time, on April the 25th, will be the 47th anniversary of the Portuguese Revolution. And I'm going to start by doing a poem I wrote in Lisbon just after the revolution. It's called Downtown Lisbon. Around this city, buildings climb hillsides, balancing uneven, unequal, echoing pink, grey, white and broken stone. Terracotta tiles fan out from the castle. Occasional walnut and olive and vine trees become hinged signs amongst the clattered passageways where washing hangs limp, waiting for a drying wind off the sea. Huddled together here with memory and desire, where perspectives collapse against lived experience, drawn into a labyrinth of repeated songs of sorrow, where centuries exist alongside the living, here where I hobble up 1,000 steps, worn away by walking ghosts, where houses overlook the past with the same windows that watch the present. Old yellow trams clatter through wide streets. You can take an elevator to rise to another level, looking down to where the city tumbles to the water's edge, and blue meets blue, and up where you find lifelines scurrying among battered cobblestones, iron-clad balconies, lemon trees in courtyards, and narrow bars, where you stand to drink a small coffee and lick custard up onto your tongue. On the corner of a square, we sip cherry brandy with others under the towering pillar of some king, a monument to an explorer from the Golden Age. Gothic railway stations where guardian angels watch beggars carry out their daily ritual, and the aroma of grilled sardines releases a memory. Singing with a million others, 1st of May 1974, while soldiers dropped red carnations from helicopters and revolution was in the air. This one is a first time out. It's called Jerusalem. Her family gathers, they hold hands except for the older man, who looks towards the rubble that was their home. He looks for a photograph of his young son who has been taken to Tel Aviv. The bulldozer has buried everything. He locks his teeth. She sits by the roadside. Her tears sting the dry earth. Again her roots are torn from her. The young boy crosses to where the troop carrier is parked, and soldiers, their jackets loosened because of the heat, laugh while the boy holds his nation's flag. 2 children run to the wall. A boy holds a large metal can that once held olive oil. Under the guns they clear a small space, dig a hole to plant a tree, carried by the girl in a bag of cloth. They firm the earth and give it a drink. Broken stumps across the dead landscape, the earth ripped open, ancient olive trees gone, except for one, where a woman holds on. She locks her hands around the trunk. 2 soldiers point their automatic weapons at her heart. In the jeep, others cheer. There is no bow of burning gold, no arrows of desire. Only a sling and stones, no spear. Gunships and misplaced settlers bring fire and brimstone here. A land flowing with terror and fear. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Roger Huddle. And ladies and gentlemen, Roger is reading this evening on drugs because he had his second jab this afternoon. So if he collapses in the middle of any of the readings, please don't take offense. Thank you very much, Roger. Our second poet is forest poet Becky Kingsnorth. Becky works in the NHS. She lives in Walthamstow with her husband and young son. She started writing a couple of years ago and has been published in Shot Glass Journal, published by Muse-Pie Press, and Blue Nib. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Becky Kingsnorth.
Thanks, Paul. I love those poems, Roger. Thanks for inviting me to read, especially alongside Ian and Roger. Yeah, I haven't been writing for very long, and it's been quite difficult to write this past year, just as I'm sure a lot of people have found. But the two poems I've chosen are quite recent, so it's good to have a chance to read them. So the first one is Hang Glider. The hang glider was insurance, nothing more. I stuck to the city, built up and edgeless, even when the width of the glider meant I had to walk sideways down the narrower streets, even when my elbows, raised by the reach of my arms to the bar above, knocked strangers' faces and I was shoved. Even when I could see their eyes flit to patches of sweat at my armpits and could not bring my arms to my side. Even when I could have skipped the last few steps on the stairs, let the air lower me down, toes pointed like a pantomime fairy, I stuck to walking, toes curled pointlessly against my inner soles, with every gust that threw me off course. But you know how blustery it has been, and the way I walk on the outside of my feet, it was inevitable, that step that missed a beat. That moment where neither one foot nor the other connected with the ground, and I found myself not running, but falling, and failing to land, falling right into the sky. And do you know, if this were all there was, it'd be all right, if this were all. The boy, shivery Ness. Not, then, the planned clear view, no blue horizon, steadying line, no calm edge to regulate the breath, but a matchstick defence boom marching, a flung line to Sheppey. The sea gone, the mudflat monochrome, rubble strewn, as if you had parted outstretched arms and rocks had rolled at your bidding. Drink in uninhabitable sand, uninhibited mud, a glare burn bright to your eyes, the unbalancing cries of gulls. And the boy, tethered, yellow back alarming in the sun, belly smeared with estuary mud, the chain embedded in the ooze, each muscular link a wet mouth unashamedly spattered with crumbs. Climb now on its back, warm your collarbone and cheek, knock your knuckles, make it speak, and hum as your hanging hand strokes and pats, the deep rumble and thud seeming to come from your own chest pressed flat against the boy, as if you held the greater capacity. Your ribs expand, your spine curves to contain the air you draw in, slower, deeper. These are the waking hours. Before the inevitable rise, gentle dance with the tide, disguising the fight of the body of air held beneath the surface. And you can know yourself here, where the defined edge you thought you needed has disappeared.
Yay. Thank you so much, Becky. Beautifully read. It was wonderful. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have Ian Duhig. Ian won the National, and he is also a Forward Prize winner and has been shortlisted for many other prizes. His new and selected poems are due out later in 2021 with Picador Press, and Ian will read poems from all his books, including your requests as well. And there will be a Q&A at the end if you'd like to ask Ian any questions. Please welcome Ian Duhig.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you all for being here in my front room. I'm going to be reading from all of my books, as Paul says, but I'm very well aware of the fact that there's a lot of poets in the audience tonight. So as well as choosing poems which were requested, I want to make comments about them addressing poets in particular, aspects of writing that maybe these poems relate to. So the first poem was requested by Harriet Proudfoot. Hello, Harriet. It's called From the Irish. Oh yeah, hold on. You'll also be able to read my poems, which is good because I can mumble sometimes. And also if my accent is difficult to understand, then you can see there. Recently, I came across a quote from Alice Oswald. She said, poetry is not about language, but when language gets impossible. And this is almost like a humorous reflection on that. I studied Irish in various places. I'm absolutely terrible at it. But Dineen's dictionary is the great etymological dictionary of Irish. But Dineen did rather tend to use words, put words in there with definitions as what he thought they ought to mean. A bit like the Académie Française, you know, rather than people really use them. So I use them to make what's been described as the most unsuccessful love poem since the Second World War, from the Irish. According to Dineen, a gale unsurpassed in lexicographical enterprise, the Irish for moon means the white circle in a slice of half-boiled potato or turnip. A star is the mark on the forehead of a beast, and the sun is the bottom of a lake or well. Well, if I say to you, your face is like a slice of half-boiled turnip, your hair is the color of a lake's bottom, and at the center of each of your eyes is the mark of the beast, it is because I want to love you properly, according to Dineen. This next poem comes with a trigger warning. It was requested by Brian Doherty, and I was initially reluctant to read it because I do get complaints from Welsh people. I have to say, the background to this poem is my wife's grandfather, who was very anti-Catholic, very anti-Irish, which I have to say is a part of Welsh history, very difficult relations between the two. So bear with me, and my apologies to Welsh people in the audience. It's called Hen Iaith A'i Chaneuon, or Chaneuon. I've heard different pronunciations of it. And it has an epigraph from the Red Book of Hergest, one of the great classics of Welsh literature. If the tongue only speak the mind's truth, there wouldn't be any neighbours. When I go down to Wales for the long bank holiday to visit my wife's grandfather, who is teetotal, who is a non-smoker, who does not approve of anyone who is not teetotal and a non-smoker. When I go down to Wales for the long, long bank holiday with my second wife to visit her grandfather, who deserted Methodism for the red flag, who won't hear a word against Stalin, who despite my oft-professed socialism secretly believes I am still with the Pope's legions, receiving coded telegrams from the Vatican specifying the dates, times, and positions I should adopt for political activity and sexual activity, who in his 90th year took against boxing, which was the only thing I could ever talk to him about. when I visit my second wife's surviving grandfather, and when he listens to the football results in Welsh, I will sometimes slip out to the pub. I will sometimes slip out to the pub and drink pint upon pint of that bilious whey they serve there, where the music will invariably be the best of the Rosh Clanagregog male voice choir, and I'll get trapped by some brain donor from up the valley who will really talk about that language so strong and so beautiful that has grown out of the ageless mountains, that speech of wondrous beauty that our fathers wrought, who will chant to me in Welsh his soporific verses about Graffiti ap Llewellyn and Daffy ap Llewellyn, and who will give me 2 solid hours of slaver because I don't speak Irish, and who will then bring up religion. Then I will tell him I know one Irish prayer about a Welsh king on that very subject, and I will recite for him as follows. Fog the English Chelder, is do Grejif gan Vian gan Vree, maar Gorobish a clock van Doid, Mogale, Onre, Re. Beautiful, he will say, as they all do. It sounds quite beautiful. And the title is Welsh. I think I mentioned the old tongue, these songs, the old tongue and its songs, a few notes there. The Irish is by a poet called Raftery, Yeats' Raftery, that he was so keen on, and set at the time of the Act of Supremacy, when they were sending over the English priests to Ireland after they pulled out of Rome. And it translates, away with you and your foreign religion and your baseless, meaningless faith, for the only rock it is founded on is the bollocks of King Henry VIII. This is a request by Ruth Higgins, a curse on Heptonstall. All these so far have been in the Bradford Count. I will say, in terms of getting something off your chest, writing a curse poem is very good. I do it sometimes on courses, and I got Kim Moore wrote a fantastic poem, a fantastic curse poem after we used it here. As always, I think curses are better if it's a massive overreaction to what's happened to you. And this is the loss of a pen. It's called A Curse on Heptonstall. Come all you demons, heed my call and bless this curse on Heptonstall. My pilot pens aren't safe at all, for stuffed with thieves is Heptonstall. Please let my couplets never pour before well cursed is Heptonstall. For every ill I'll cast a trawl and dump my catch on Heptonstall. May all vile things that creep and crawl repair at once to Heptonstall. Let drunken bears and werewolves brawl around the streets of Heptonstall. And then may they play basketball with human heads in Heptonstall. While madless fits like those of Saul afflict the folk of Heptonstall. Let every storm and freezing squall blow in their winds to Heptonstall. May shite and fire and brimstone fall on every roof in Heptonstall. While mortar rots from every wall that holds a roof in Heptonstall. May shingles wrap him like a shawl who stole my pen in Heptonstall. Let pus gush like a waterfall from all his sores in Heptonstall, and each sore bore in like an awl through his foul flesh in Heptonstall. So all the fool can do is sprawl and weep and groan in Heptonstall. I hear him scream, I hear him bawl and beg for death in Heptonstall, and set about him with a maul to break his bones in Heptonstall. O cue you fiends by Satan's soul, and catch the bus to Heptonstall. My verse has just begun to stall, so take your turn on Heptonstall. You have the evil wherewithal to serve them well in Heptonstall. That cankered penine call of dandruff, Heptonstall, where pens get stole. And then, embarrassingly, I found my pen. This is from my second book, The Mersey Goldfish. Language, as I opened the reading with, is obviously exactly what poetry is about in many ways. And sometimes it moves beyond language, but this was an interesting exercise. It's called a Lorca Gathaela. A Gathaela is a model he got through Arabic poetry, entered Spanish poetry through Arabic poetry. It's the same as a ghazal, as we pronounce it in Bradford, although I hear elsewhere it's pronounced ghazal. But this was a relocated version of a Lorca poem, the Gathaela of the Dead Child. And then it was retranslated back into Spanish by two poets, Carlos Lopez Beltran and Pedro Serrano, and ultimately anthologized in Spanish. Aloka Gathela. The dead feathered themselves with moss. The clouded wind and the clear wind are game birds whirring between towers, and the day is an injured child. Afternoons, the water gets sat down with its pals as a bit of a laugh. Where I come from, such afternoons, each such afternoon costs a child's life. Not a wisp of cloud stuck to the sky when we met in the caves of wine. No tuft of cloud snagged on a thorn when you became taken by water. A monster of water broke on the fells, and the dogs rolled and the lilies rolled. Under my violet shadowed hands, you were an archangel of cold. This is called Nothing Pie, my third book, Nominees. It's about, I'm also very interested in turns of phrase in language, idioms, and maybe what lies behind them. And quite often what lies behind them is hatred, you know. Jane Sprackland has a book called The Birkdale Nightingales, and that's kind of an insult, you know. It's that, like, it's referred to frogs, and they're called Birkdale Nightingales because, you know, you're abusing the Birkdale people, saying this is what they think a nightingale sounds like, or this is their version of a nightingale. And that lies behind this poem called Nothing Pie. And of course, in this, it's a kind of racism. When I told my dad that the locals called a dandelion an Irish daisy, I'd have to admit he looked disenthralled, and soon his farts were Yorkshire nightingales. A dandelion, a Yorkshire daisy, a Yorkshire screwdriver banged in his nails. Tipperary invented the riding, and Nothing Pie meant my Yorkshire pudding. Abide with me, Daddy, be abiding. Now, Owen's asking what our garden grows, Barton good, full rhymes when he says budding. Man will know, I call everything a rose. This is the Lammas Hireling. Competitions came up earlier on, and the only thing I'd say about competitions is, having judged them myself, if people say there's such a thing as a competition, but, you know, a competition poem, a style of poem that always does well at competitions. But imagine what it's like when you're a judge, as I have been. You've got thousands of poems. If you've got poem after poem of what people think is a competition poem, it's a nightmare. You know, you want something which is a bit different. The first time I won the National, it was with a poem about a transsexual Mexican revolutionary, the great Manuel Palafox. This poem, and I can't imagine there are too many poems about transsexual Mexican revolutionaries in that particular competition. This poem was different. It was based on a story I heard when I was out for a walk about a family of witches. And once again, this is a person who has had an experience. The speaker of the poem is an unreliable narrator. He's had an experience he doesn't understand. So he's reaching out to idioms and bits of broken knowledge to try and make sense of his experience. One thing I will say here about, which might not be clear, is the business about casting ball. He's not reading crystal balls or anything, he's making shot. You have the thing which you make shot, it's called casting ball. And it also refers to, some of the idioms it refers to go back to a medieval poem called The Names of the Hare, the Lammas Hireling. After the fair, I'd still a light heart and a heavy purse he struck so cheap, and cattle doted on him. In his time, mine only dropped heifers, fat as cream. Yields doubled. I grew fond of company that knew when to shut up. Then, one night, disturbed from dreams of my dear late wife, I hunted down her torn voice to his pale form. Stock still in the light from the dark lantern, stark naked, but for the foxtrap biting his ankle, I knew him a warlock, a cow with leather horns. To go into the hair gets you muckle sorrow, the wisdom runs, muckle care. I levelled and blew the small hour through his heart. the moon came out. By its yellow witness, I saw him fur over like a stone mossing. His lovely head thinned, his top lip gathered, his eyes rose like bread. I carried him in a sack that grew lighter at every step and dropped him from a bridge. There was no splash. Now my head's elf-shot. I don't dream, but spend my nights casting ball from half-crowns and my days here. Bless me, Father, I have sinned. It has been an hour since my last confession. This is another request. It's the first half of the two-part poem. This is from Alison Riley, from American Graffiti. And I did once get complaints about this too, but what it was it was part of, tells you something about my standing in contemporary poetry. I was commissioned to write poems for the men's and women's toilets in an art centre. And this was to be placed on the door of the women's toilets. And I imagined some woman, in my mind's eye, I thought, well, I would like women to enjoy it, but I imagine maybe a woman was a bit upset or something like this. And so it conjures up a goddess who has a spectacularly disturbing name that you will hear, but she's a very powerful goddess, but she is the goddess of taking on board your sins. She's the goddess of taking on board terrible things that's happened to you. And that's the name, the eater of excrement that I mentioned. That's what it is, absolution. You can confess your sins to her, they will be forgiven. You can talk to her about terrible things that you're enduring. So that's who it is. She's part of a triple goddess from the Aztecs. So, from American Graffiti for Alison Riley, Women's Room. I open for you my mouth. I open for you my two eyes, the white chamber of my skull. From my old tongue your sentences will rise, for I am Goddess Llaelcowani, eater of excrement, sister of Tlazolteotl. Problems with some male. I cut off his eggs with my obsidian glass knife. Perhaps an office colleague is harassing you. I gut him and stuff the corpse with chocolate. You suspect a carpenter is overcharging you. I sacrifice his firstborn to the plumed serpent. See, I do have a knack for this sort of thing, and you worship me even by sitting here, considering the compact, adjusting the mask. My mouth must soon close. Open your mouth. Ask. This is a terrible thing, but very often people, if you're going to start writing poetry, think about elegies. It's almost worth stockpiling elegies. I never imagined I would end up writing so many contemporaries and people I got very attached to. And this is for Mike Donaghy, a poet of my generation, who was a great, terrific Irish musician. And it's from The Speed of Dark, but it's written for Beverley Minster, which does have an extraordinary number of carvings of music, as I say, the most in Europe. It mentions a tune that Mike liked to play, which in Irish is called Tuair Dáin de Love. It has three names, Da Mihi Manam, Tuair Dáin de Love, and in English, Give Me Your Hand. Wallflowers at Beverley. More instruments ring these walls than raise the roof for God throughout old medieval Christendom. Stone arcades spring like dancers from the minster floor, keyed to the Lord's calling on song, Da Mihi Manam. The Irish call the parchment drum this angel quiets a bowron, though she lacks the ordinary beater. Mike held his like a pen above the skin in weight, counting on his own heart to inspire each tattoo. But he might change to flute for quieter audiences, bored without dancers' feet to ground his syncopation, channeling them, charming them with Rory Dowell's Give Me Your Hand. They applauded and rose to the dash of his playing. So Mike's book Wallflowers notes, offbeat theories that were all God's three-dimensional handwriting, or how a pin's head can really stage angels' Kayleys. Another made dance the mother of all languages. Then it gives all this living hand, Keats's last poem, which dampens my skin like the touch of a felt mute. I'll sit out this stone angel till she leaves her drum, raises and play something quick on the Irish flute. In memory of Mike. This one is called Goths. It was requested by a great poet who I'm a big fan of, John Glenday. It was really inspired by what I thought was a total injustice. There was the Goths in Leeds used to gather outside the Corn Exchange, but they were banned. The Corn Exchange went up market and they decided they would get rid of them all. And I thought that was an outrage, really. So I wrote this poem, Goths. I should mention it talks about Sadako and Ringo. Ringo, this is a Japanese horror film. Ring means a well. I mean, well, it's about a well, but Ringu is ring literally, but it's the view from the well. And Sadako comes out of the well, and she's got this long black straight hair, and she reminded me of them. So Goths, and of course, everybody goes to Whitby, to Leeds, and everywhere else. Big place of Goth pilgrimage. Goths. I love them. They bring a little anti-life and uncolour to the Corn Exchange on city centre shopping days, as if they had all just crawled out of that Ringu well. So many Sadakos dripping tarnished silver jewellery onto the undead fashions they dig up in flea markets. They are the black that is always the new black. Their perfume lingers, freshly turned grave sweet. Black sheep, they pilgrimage twice a year to Whitby through our landscape of dissolved monastery and pit, toasting themselves in cider and blackcurrant, vegan blood. They dance macabre at gigs like the Dracula Spectacular. The next morning, love-bitten and wincing in the sunlight, they take photos of each other, hoping they won't develop. This is, in terms of where, you know, people are always interested in where inspiration comes from. But I mean, I do think it's good to have your eyes open and listen and talk to people. And one day I was in the local co-op and the weather was strange. And I said to the woman on the till, this is really weird weather, isn't it? And she said, Mother Shipton said we would know no seasons. And I thought, that is fantastic. You know, Mother Shipton, sort of great, legendary prophetess, Yorkshire woman, but known all around the world. She's still alive in the idioms of people that have surrounded me. And I got thinking about her. And her prophecies are kind of lie behind this, really. My last book was, I was pleased to get a good review from Jeremy Noel Todd in the Sunday Times. But we were in touch separately from that, and he said that this was his favourite poem in that collection. So I really should dedicate it to that woman. But when I went to the co-op, she didn't work there anymore. Anyway, Mother Shipton. I know you'll pass the World's End bar to cross the river by the well, whose water changes time to stone to find our Yorkshire Sibyl's home. You'll know her face's sickle moon from moth's wings, punch, old bills for plays, and metered words of metered fate from Pepys, Defoe, the internet. In her unending ending worlds, hares make our hearths their birthing beds. A thorn hangs horses, swords plough fields, while one-eyed women wade through blood. What all this means, the wise don't ask, but watch from shadows in her cave. Dead metaphors escape their grave to breathe again behind her mask. This is also in the new bit of, that's not in the new bit, that's in my previous book. This is from the new and selected, the new poems. It's called The Names of the Plague and takes on its model from the names of the hare, which I mentioned before in the context of the Lammas Hireling. But the project I was working on was called From Irish Fever to Chinese Flu, the racialization of epidemics. And it was really against the background of increasing anti-Asian violence here and in America, and the way at times of contagion, people search for scapegoats, and the names themselves that people use for these diseases are indeed a giveaway in themselves. This is called the names of the plague. The blame gamer, the ill shamer, the brave killer, the grave filler, the butt passer, the eyeglasser, the sight saver, the night raver, the face shaker, the rule breaker, the duff ruler, the bluff fooler, the world beater, the word eater, the first aider, the worst paider, the spit sailor, the inhaler, the high fever, the deep griever, the dry cougher, the hat duffer, the cold creeper, the old reaper, the youth wrecker, the truth checker, the head cracker, the lost tracker, the host tracer, the slow tracer, the host racer, the slow tracer, the job loser, the lost boozer, the cramped homer, the spread coma, the room slayer, the doomsayer, the sick tricker, the nit picker, the mad hatter, the foiled hat, the mad chatter, the foil hatter, the mask hater, the nurse baiter, the flock fleecer, the palm greaser, the deal lander, the backhander, the wrong richer, the song hitcher, the rhyme rider, the time bider. Its chief name is Legion. This is going to be, this is apart from poetry, this is something from outside that. This isn't going to be in a book at all. It's going to be on a plaque. It tells the story of David Olawale. In Black Lives Matter, people talked about that as if that was a recent thing, but it goes on. Police abuse of minorities, it's gone on constantly, as long as they've been police, really. But David Olawale, I've been associated with the David Olawale Memorial Association, and this kind of tells his story. They're installing a plaque in his memory on Chapeltown Road, near where he used to live, and this poem will be on that plaque. And Naroko, as the poem explains, is a kind of magic message from Yoruba. A Naroko for David Olawale. Olawale is Yoruba for God has come home, but he came to find hell in God's own country. No home but cold lead streets or police cells. In his asylum, only electroconvulsive therapy. Now, by the air, where David drowned fleeing policemen's boots, his feet light from hunger, my small nomadic cowrie garden grows for one who'd grown to be a shell of himself in this city. An empty cowrie is full as an egg with meanings. God's eyes, they make arokos, magic messages, because Efa, Yoruba for 6, has the same letters as the word to draw. My 6 cowries set down here draw David's Christian ghost into Ocean's arms. Water goddess with the name of water, that he too might step into the true meaning of his own name, born back to Africa, where the river of us all rose. This alchemy of cold fire on the air's earth makes nothing happen, like poetry, yet makes something from nothing for a man treated like he was nothing, making room to reflect on river water running softly. This is called The Death of Riley, thinking of another poet. I'm glad that you can see it on the screen because there's a couple of bits that are in italics are quotes from Riley's poems. Riley was a tremendous poet, completely lost to the general awareness. So I'm glad this opportunity to tell his story, The Death of Riley. After John Riley was born again into the Orthodox Church, our poet of light was snuffed out by thugs, his broken body found by public toilets in the earthly city, his first birthplace. I'd pass them daily on my bus before the council sold the site, a caged-off brick shelter, half screened by weeping lime trees. I heard whisper, in the night the struggle of the men is not heard. I worked by the 3 hierarchs down the road, a converted Methodist chapel. When its iconostasis was delivered, A wing floated in chains above our city traffic, poised for the moment between worlds like contradictory meanings over a Riley line break. Until the lorry hoist's gear stuttered free, then it settled into the forklift truck's raised arms as if an icon onto an easel. Settling too, as anxious as any young father at a new delivery, was the old priest who told me that gold in icons represented the radiance of heaven, red, divine life, blue meant human life. I wondered if Riley went there, but learned that it was Greek. He was baptized Russian Orthodox, but preferred to attend Polish Orthodox church services, being buried by their rites. I heard there too how once, for Greek Orthodox theologians, any statement about God was required to have two features. First, it must be paradoxical. Secondly, it must lead to silence. An IRA bomb that destroyed the offices with Riley's books led to silence. They poise still in that moment, broken wings open to the shivered sky, pages alight, if not with his God. When I told the priest Riley's poems were called verbal icons, he smiled and said icon makers call their own craft writing, then disappeared back inside his church's blazing darkness. I'm still waiting outside. Poets' tales are too unfinished for us. This is a toast written for the Sensing Spaces exhibition at the Royal Academy, where I wrote in relation to an installation by a Chinese. It was actually mainly an architect, but he did art too. Chinese hosts at feasts once floated bowls of wine on water mazes to inspire poetic toasts from guests. I toasted one Chinese New Year in an artist's maze, Li Xiaodong's, there to make an exhibition of myself with a new poem glossing perfection. His hazel text enclosing a snowy night garden, a mirror hanging in its center to expand upon black and white space, where guests drank in the silence and Chinese wine. So I toasted the maze's night for ink to pen the day, its snow for covering the labyrinths of my missteps, its hazel twigs for weaving hurdles round my head, its mirror for hosting faces borrowed from the dead. And this is the last poem in my new and selected, and I'm remembering here someone, a singer he put in the windows that I'm looking at now when I read to you. The Parting Glass, it's called, in memory of Brian and Bernard Davey, his birth names. Builder without cards, sweet voice, sharp dealer, Carrickfergus Bernard I heard him called first, though not born Bernard or from Carrickfergus, but a refugee from pogroms in West Belfast. Here, relabeled bipolar, his house of no cards fell. He couldn't leave his civil war as easily as names. Too long the handsome boatman under bare poles. He needn't tap the glass to know about the storms. I remember him fixing our front room windows, shuffling decks of glass from struts taking pains. I remember how utterly cold invaded my home until he made it just a picture in the frame again. And I'm going to finish with Sight Unseen, about a wonderful lost working class art, it seems to me, of prophecy. Tea bags were the death of tasseographers. I consulted one here, one of the last here at a fair. She offered me an Earl Grey or Darjeeling, saying their big leaves are best for old eyes. While it was brewing, she shared biscuits and memories of the Second World War, reassuring wives, mothers, and daughters behind the blackouts of news and curtains. It was about comfort, even when the news turned out to be bad. Nobody came back to moan, I only wish I'd suffered longer. Even when she knew, she said, she'd lie. She told me not to dunk my shortbread, then to swirl my cup thrice widdershins left-handedly, turn it over and then back. She looked in, paused, and smiled kindly. Thank you for listening to me. Now, open for questions if people would like to ask questions. Thank you. Oops. Hi, Paul.
So don't be shy, folks. You take yourself off mute and first of all, give Ian and our two other readers, Becky Kingsnorth and Roger Huddle, a big round of applause. And who would like to ask Ian the first question?
Ian.
Yeah?
Barry here. Where do you get your poetic voice from? Where does it?
Well, my family came from Ireland, but when I grew up, my mother, the way they'd been taught poetry in school was you learned it all off by heart, you know, loads and loads of poetry, you just learned it off by heart. So my mother would recite it constantly. So I grew up listening to this. And even when I didn't really understand it, I had a sense of how the trajectory of a poem, the sort of ground it might cover, what it might sound like, the sort of musics that you would associate in language with poetry. But of course, I was the first one, I was the 8th child, but I was the first one born in England. So everything I grew up with was different. And so I grew up in a family where there was respect for poetry. My parents respected it. There was great respect for poetry in Ireland. But in England, it was regarded rather differently. So when I left university, I mean, I didn't go to university. I studied English, but when I left, I worked in the homeless field for a long time. And poetry was a place I went to sort of recover from work in many ways. But I did get tempted back into poetry. I ran a hostel for homeless people in York, and it was next door to a famous folk club. And as soon as the folk club found out what we were opening up, they banned all staff and all residents, you know, in advance, even before we opened. You know, I mean, I have been barred from pubs in the past, but not normally before I actually got there. You know, so we would listen to the songs like "I Am a Jolly Beggar Man," you know, through the walls of the, you know, and knowing very well if any of our jolly beggar men went anywhere near the place, they'd have the lorna. So I wrote some songs, I wrote some new words for songs that I was listening to, but about our residents. And then I worked in Northern Ireland. I worked in a hostel in Northern Ireland, and I was just so impressed by the Northern Irish poets that that all fed into it, really. So different times in my life, different things. And it's meant different things for me. It became more central as my life went on, because I've always enjoyed poetry, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul, I have a question.
Hi.
Hi there, Ian. It's Michael here. And I really enjoyed the range of your poems, you know, some kind of humorous ones and political ones and all sorts. And I just wondered which poets have been the biggest influences on you, you know, throughout your writing life.
Well, as I say, I mean, I've always read a lot. I've always enjoyed a lot of poetry. But I think the first time I felt poetry was really part of a world around me, bearing in on me, was when I worked in Northern Ireland. I remember there was a book edited by Frank Ormsby called Poets from the North of Ireland. And to read that in Belfast, this was before, obviously before the Good Friday Agreement, you know, when, you know, there were still bombs going off and it was a very dangerous place. But reading reading the poetry that's bred, and the tremendous poets. I mean, this is not to say, I mean, I know sometimes there are some corners of English poetry that feel that it was neglected during that period, but nevertheless, it was an extraordinary experience to have poets as different as Seamus Heaney, obviously. But Michael Longley had a big influence on me, his gentleness. And in the face of all that, such a wonderful, subtle, gentle poet. Derek Mahon, obviously, formerly, Maeve McGuckian. Just the visionary nature of her work was astonishing. And then you got people like Kieran Carson coming along and have continued. But I've always liked to read poems in translation too. What I said about at the beginning, quoting Alice Oswald about the struggle with language, I think that struggle is very clearly going on in translated poetry. And Lorca, that wonderful singing Spanish. You know, I don't speak Spanish, but I did do Latin at school and French. And with parallel translations, I could get some sense of what he was doing. Lots of Irish poets from the past, because my mother would be reciting them. I think about Mangan, who again an interesting formal poet, but also democratic. One of the poems that my mother liked to recite was The Woman of Three Cows, good, and it had the lines which my mother liked and I liked too. Good luck to you, don't scorn the poor, and don't be their despiser, for worldly wealth soon melts away and cheats the very miser. So I'd advise you all to read widely if you aren't already. I'm sure you are, but I suppose it was in Belfast that it all bore in on me with an urgency that it never had before.
Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Hi, Judy.
It's always struck me that you're a poet best read aloud, and preferably by yourself, as it were. A bardic tradition that is somewhere behind you that mixes together the dramatic and the heroic and the bass and the comedic, and comes out with something which is an amazing potpourri and something much richer than any of those things would be on their own. Do you feel yourself to be an Irish bard at bottom?
I don't feel Irish, really. I have to be honestly, I think I feel somewhere between Ireland and England. And I always say that sort of I'm hyphenated. I have a poem with Mike about being hyphenated, but I always say that the hyphen is more important than either the British or the Irish side of it. You know, I think it's the angle that gives you on it. But I'll tell you what I liked, what impressed me, was if you went to Irish music pubs, when somebody sang, everybody shut up. They didn't shut up when people were playing, but when a singer got up, they commanded the floor. And there was something about that, that was the respect of the singing, but it also, sometimes there would be poetry and it was the same. And when people offer you their attention, I sort of feel that you have to, more than entertain them, give your best, you know. And I suppose one of the things I like about poetry, and one of the things I like about groups like this, or even competitions, is people put their best into their poetry. They share the best of themselves. And it's a wonderful privilege to have that. And it seems to me that there is a responsibility and you have to honor that. So I feel all of those things go into it. And I do my best to meet all the different demands that is made on poetry, and I feel was made on me. Does that make sense, Judy? Is that answering your question?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for asking it.
We have had a question from Jane Wilkinson. Ian, Jane, would you like to ask your question?
Jane?
I know she
Hi.
was typing a while back.
Yeah, I was just in hiding.
Hi.
I was just wondering who you were reading at the moment. Do you have any recommendations? Not necessarily new poets, but possibly, or just someone you've been revisiting that you're interested in?
Well, what I'm revisiting and reading at the same time is Julia Copus's biography of Charlotte Mew. She's a terrific poet, but I knew her work, but I didn't know her in context. I didn't know her life that well. And it is she was an extraordinary poet, and in some ways her very famous poem, The Farmer's Wife, is not, although it's formally very different, and obviously she's writing as a woman, but it's not a million miles removed from the Lammas Hireling in terms of agricultural sexuality, pansexuality, the woman who his wife may or may not be a hare, the unreliable narrator, her rhythms. She got lumped in with the Georgians, but I remember Julia quotes a contemporary newspaper reviewer saying, she's a changeling among the Georgian poets, and she changed things. She changed the way they wrote poetry. But of course, she was not one of the big modernists who got all the attention. She was not Eliot or Pound, although Pound championed her work. So she's literally who I'm looking at the moment. And I actually wrote to Julia today about the book which I finished, which I thought was very impressive. She lived such tragedy she endured, sometimes that really helps me appreciate poets. I've ordered a few books. I'm looking forward to reading Kyle Chingonwe's new book, A Blood Condition. And I've got a pile of books over there I'm looking at. I usually have quite a lot on the go at the moment, and very often I'm looking at them in different contexts. What I've been writing most immediately is lyrics for a band. So I've been looking at poems that reflect that sort of thing. So I hop about a bit, but I would, Charlotte Mew and that book, Julia Copus's book, both impressed me and their poetry. So rereading her.
Thank you. That was really great. I actually have that on my list again.
Oh, really?
And I just, the universe obviously keeps putting her in front of me. So thanks. I heard the Poplar poem. I'm not sure what it's titled, but watching the poplars being felled recently on the radio. So I thought it was stunning. So thanks for that. That's a great answer.
Thank you for the question.
We have a question from Sue Spears.
Hi, Sue.
Hello, I'll just take myself off mute. What's your editing process from the nugget, the kernel, out to a fully fledged poem? Is it different for each poem?
What I'd say is take longer. I take longer than I used to. What my real editing process is, which is I do when I go along, is I like to write on buses. And one of the reasons I like to write on buses is it gives you the sense, I have to keep coming back at it with fresh eyes. You write something and you're constantly trying to look at it with fresh eyes. What would it be like if somebody's seen this for the first time and they haven't just slightly revised it? And when I'm on a bus, because I'm in a different place all the time, it gives me some kind of a sense of looking at it with fresh eyes. But I work on it for a bit, put it away for a while, and put it away for quite a long while. And sometimes it might take years between the beginning and the end that I'm happy with. I'm never sort of entirely wildly happy with anything, but the point at which I probably give up, really, I think I can't make it any better. One thing I would say, which it's going to sound obvious, but people don't say it, is you will spend a lot of time looking at the poem and doing nothing towards the end. And what is going on there is you are convincing yourself that there is nothing better you can do with it. It's worth taking that time where you might not seem to be making any changes, but that's because you are running through all of the changes that you might make and realizing they're not going to improve it, that you come to the end with that poem. So that's an important part of it. So the rest of it, I would say, probably most people will do anyway. You know, look at it from different points of view. Would it be better if I wrote this in the voice of someone, or would it be better if I broke it up, chop it up, cut the verses up, look at them in order, cut the first verse, a bit like Chekhov said, I think, with short stories, chop the last verse. Very often the last verse can be a good first verse. So all of those things I think are in there, but towards the end, give it time. I know they always say give it time, but it is true. Years, sometimes years, you know. I leave things unfinished a lot. I don't sort of try and stampede towards a finished poem. You know, like artists will very often have pictures in their studio that is maybe 80% done or 70% done, and they'll leave it there for a long time. I do the same with poems. They're not completely finished, but they're in my consciousness, and I will return to them. And Yeats would do that, apparently. He would have a poem maybe 3/4 finished, and it would be on his desk. And it might be there for a year. So something is going on in the back of your mind. Sometimes, one of the things I suppose that's good about that is it allows chance. A chance discovery might enable you to finish the poem or recast it in a better way. So you're making yourself available for good luck. Does that make sense, Sue? Sue's fallen asleep.
Yeah. I mean, I have my cogitating place where I sort of run lines in my head.
Yeah.
Think about how it comes out of your mouth, and sometimes you've got an idea, but not the structure or the words to go with it.
Yeah.
So I go to my cogitating place and just let it develop there.
One piece of advice, great piece of advice, originally from G.K. Chesterton, I think, profound, is if something's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And what it means by that is just make a start, you know, have a go, get it down on paper. If it's important, you know, don't wait for it to be perfect. Have a go, then work on it. If it's important to you, you will find a way eventually. But first of all, you will do it badly, of course.
You've muted yourself. You've muted.
Sorry. Yes, I don't know. My enthusiasm to stress the need for that, you know, this is really important. No, anyway, but you know, it's important. If it's going to be important to you, risk doing it badly to start off with. Of course, it will be bad. Very often, it will be terrible. But through that, you will find a way. If you give yourself time, you don't know where the poem will take you. Like Robert Frost said, I never started a poem knowing where it would finish. If you know where it will finish, it will probably be a predictable poem and therefore bad, you know. So take the risk of being terrible at the beginning. Take the risk of it's not seeming to be worth much, but it might take you somewhere extraordinarily wonderful and unexpected. But don't try and conceive of a near perfect poem before you start. Get stuck in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I might take that silence, Ian, as a good opportunity to finish there.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank
Walt.
you very much, Ian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic evening, and thank you to our two other poets as well. Our next one up is 24th of May with the two Sarahs, Sarah Doyle and Sarah Westcott. Sorry if I interrupted proceedings halfway through. My internet actually crashed. So I spent about 5-10 minutes struggling to get back into the call. But I've learned that I can leave, my internet can crash, but the call can still carry on, which is fantastic.
Oh, that's good.
I just assumed I'd knocked everybody else out as well, but you were still there reading when I came back.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Very inspiring.
Well done again, Paul.